Okay, in this video, beginner series number 5, I'm going to go into more detail on two types of mushrooms. One is the Agricus campestris, pinky or pink bottom, and its look-alike cousin, Xanthodermus, the yellow stainer, and the winter mushroom or brick cap, as it's sometimes called.
Okay, while we're covering the subject of pinkies, pink bottoms, in this segment I'm going to stop and explain a few things. One thing is that I'm always set warning about eating white mushrooms. Okay, now those white mushrooms you buy in the store are Agricus. They're the cousin to the pinky. Now the pinky is Agricus campestris, and I say in my videos you identify them by the pink gills on the bottom. Now there's another mushroom in the same family, and that is Agricus ectodermis. Now this mushroom, the way you can tell the difference between this and a pinky is this mushroom stains a bright yellow very rapidly after it's been bruised or cut. But later it changes back to white. Now this is the one big difference between the two. So the pink gills is not the only determinant factor about the campestris. It's the fact that the ectodermis, which they say is anything from not edible to make you sick to poisonous. Again, it depends on the reaction. But the difference is that yellow stainer, you cut it, it stains bright yellow very rapidly, and then later changes back, as I mentioned. The pinky, the campestris, doesn't. It'll stain yellow sometimes when it's bruised or cut, and then it'll later fade to a brown, kind of like an old color. Mushroom's been sitting around in a refrigerator. Now these are important things to remember. The one thing I always say, the reason why I'm warning about the white is the pink bottom grows in grassy areas and meadows. And as you can see, it gets quite large, and the buttons can be quite large. The one you want to be careful of is the amanita, okay? But this generally grows in the wooded areas, and rather than have a veil when it comes out and opens up, it comes up from a bulbous substance on the bottom called a vulva. Now this is one determinant factor about them. That and the size, they don't get as big as a pinky. So like I always say, get your field guide, make your notes, study, do your homework, and you shouldn't have to be afraid of picking pink bottoms, because they are distinct, and they are really a beginner's mushroom. And they taste pretty much the same as the white buttons in a store, those Agricus. The portobello is in the same family. It's an Agricus as well. So, take note. Okay, here I'm going to talk about some different parts, some different shapes, and different species of mushrooms. This particular specimen is a pink bottom, rather large pink bottom button. We say button because it is not opened up. This stage here is not a button. You can see it's opened up, and actually it's getting mature and the gills are starting to change color. What I want to show in this button, this membrane, this thin membrane right here is called a veil. Now this is the cap, the top of the mushroom itself. This is a normal round shaped cap. This of course is the stem or stalk, but this is the veil, and I'm going to break open this thin membrane, try to show you that, because some have membranes and some do not. I'm going to break that open and just try to show you. I don't know if you can see down in there. I don't think so. I got another one over here where the veil has already started to open up. Oh, that's not it. Here the veil is already opened up, and you can see it's a tan color. almost pinkish, but actually more tan colored. But it's still a pink bottom. Doesn't have to be exactly pink, but still, it's good to exercise caution. And again, some have a veil and some do not. There are many different characteristics to many different types of mushroom. I'll try to cover that a little bit more.
Okay, pinkies are found growing in grassy areas. I find most of mine in lawns. You can find them in cemeteries, grassy areas, and parks. They will be growing right out in the open, but it takes the right weather and temperature to make them fruit. Now you find them singularly, or sometimes you find them in little groups, 2 or 3 together, not exactly together, but right in the same area. Now these two here, they're growing right together. You do sometimes find them that way. Now pinkies, just like your store-bought Agricus, grow on compost. They like compost. Now in areas where there's lawns, you'll oftentimes find them growing in lines. And you'll actually see sometimes in people's lawns, you'll see the color of the grass is a lot more greener and generally just a little longer right there, I think because of the fertility. And again, when you look for pinkies, you can find them in groups, large groups, such as these. And these are actually grown in a ring, what they call a fairy ring. You can find them like that sometimes.
Okay, now here's some election day pinkies. I picked these on election day. I was on my way up to vote, and I saw these pinkies. Now I'm always talking about a window for mushrooms. And this is unusual, but then you have unusual years in a lot of different ways. Now normally these pinkies, I pick them from mid-September to early October. This is the latest I've ever seen these pinkies come out. You can see there's some nice buttons in here, some little bit bigger ones. But this is pretty decent bag for this late in a year. Okay, here we have some winter mushrooms or brick caps. And I always like to show the size in comparison to my hand. Now you can see this is an adult. It's quite large, about the size of a stump fungus. Some of these are little buttons. They're tiny. And you can see by the color, I've covered them in other videos. But one thing you want to know is when they're mature, that stem will turn black. The color is like a brick. Stem is black. But this is a cold weather loving mushroom. Remember, with this mushroom, you're looking at late October to November into December. Okay, what I'm saying is that, you know, there's no ironclad rule. One year they could be coming in the end of October. One year they could be coming in the middle of December. I found fruitings while I was hunting in December, middle of December. This depends on the weather, but this mushroom, it lasts quite a while. I mean, it slowly matures. One thing you want to note, they're slimy on top when they're wet. You put them in a bag. When they're wet and it rains, you put them in a bag, they stick to the bag. They get sticky. It feels slimy, but they're actually kind of sticky. Okay, similar to the stump fungus, the stumpies. Here's a nice little cluster of buttons. Okay, so you want to remember that. It's a late season mushroom. And of course, that depends on where you live in the States. Okay? You know, obviously location is going to make a big difference. You know, in the west and the south, it's not going to be the same here as in Michigan. So keep all these things in mind. Now I want to mention a few other things about the brick cap. Okay, as you can see, the color of this one is yellow, the stem. As is this one. I try to give as much information as I can about mushrooms. And now, as you can see, this one's maturing, and the stem is black, as I mentioned before. Okay, they come in different shape. They come in different shapes as well, because they grow in clusters at the bottom of a tree or growing up the tree. I do not use Latin scientific terminology in my videos, as I am not very good at pronouncing them. And I mentioned before, you should get a good field guide. In those field guides, the experts, they always put the Latin terminology with sometimes the slang terminology. So I recommend, again, you do this. Get a good field guide and learn. And they mention the color of the spore prints and things like that. I keep it in layman's terms. Okay, now I got a segment here. I want to show and explain a few things. You can see there's winter mushrooms growing off this wood. Now, this is a cottonwood tree, and I'm going to show a little more further in the back. I'm going to explain some things about the oyster mushroom. Now, I inoculated this big cottonwood tree after it fell, and I didn't use plug spawn, and I didn't use direct pieces of the mushroom drilling into the wood. As you can see, what I did do here is I made some cuts in the tree trunk itself, and I placed pieces of mushroom in there and rubbed it in real good. And so you can see where these oysters are up here. You can see them oysters. This is the first time I found this tree fruiting. But there's also winter mushrooms growing off of this. Now those came naturally. You can see here. Now one thing I want to explain is that if you can see where the bark has come off this tree, that's the work of the oyster. It's eating into that tree and under the bark. Now once the bark is done, the oyster mushroom is done. It's finished. It will not fruit on that log anymore. Another thing is, I've never seen them come out quite this late. This is December 1st. I've never seen oysters fruit this late in the year. It has been an unusual year, so that might have something to do with it. Also, I want to explain something like on these winter mushrooms. Location. I get asked all the time where my location is, where I'm living. Now, I live in southeastern Michigan, and so you got to bear in mind that when I say mushroom fruits mid-October to mid-November, or mid-September to mid-October, it depends where you are in latitude. Okay, up north it's colder, the seasons are going to be different. So you got to pay attention to your particular state and your particular area, and pay attention to your latitudes and what months of the year your mushrooms fruit. It's important. Now, a couple other things I'd like to explain about the brick cap. Now, once the tree is finished, the brick cap, unlike the oyster, will keep growing. You can see there was oysters and brick caps I showed in a previous video growing off this particular piece of wood. The bark is done, so the oyster is done, but the brick cap keeps on going. You can see I've cut a bunch. I cut a bunch of brick caps off of this wood yesterday. You can see there's a little bit more over here. Now, this is an elm tree. Okay, And the brick cap will grow off of many different types of wood, but it grows very well on elm. It prefers elm, and as you've seen, oak. I think it does better on soft woods than hardwoods. Although I do have a few coming out on logs, oak logs that I inoculated for shiitakes. But I never see any serious fruiting, just one here and one there. Now here are some that are slightly camouflaged because they're under the leaves. As you can see, here's a stump. But as you can see, these are growing away from the stump. Okay? That's because there's buried wood down there. And they're coming up off that buried wood. But for most of you, I do not suggest you try to pick these out away until you become familiar with this mushroom. And again, this is December 1st, so it's very late. But these are old ones. These are done. Also, you'll notice as I dig down through the leaves here, these are slightly more yellow. They're a little different color. That's because of where the shade hits. And also, they're underneath the leaves. So they're going to tend to be a little different color. Now these winter mushrooms, they're growing right off of this stump. And they're a little more orangish colored. But they're also dried out from the change in weather. So once again, I've mentioned this in other videos. Everything in nature sometimes is not an exact carbon copy. It'll vary. You got to learn the predominant characteristic of each mushroom. Another thing I forgot to mention, it also prefers swamp willow. This particular stump is a swamp willow. It does well on swamp willow as well as elm. So like I said before, get a good field guide, study it, study the distinguishing characteristics in every mushroom, and you'd be a lot better off that way having that field guide. Now, I like putting these videos out, and like I said before, I try to give as much information as I can. But I also have said in the past, get a good field guide and study.